been into my daddy's town? He's the mayor.
Western games. Oh, how I long for that perfect Wild West video game. There's been a few great attempts over the years. I mean, the Red Dead series.
He won't climb. He won't climb. And I'm going down. He won't climb. It's not my fault. What a load of crap.
Sunset Riders. Gun. And even the Oregon Trail, but none of these have really made me feel like I was a cowboy. Call of Juarez is another series that has tried to throw that cowboy experience at me but failed, so when I heard that this new game was coming out, I didn't have much hope for it. Oh well, let's take a look anyway, shall we? The game starts in Abilene, Kansas in 1910 when our main character enters a bar and is almost instantly recognised by some to be the legendary bounty hunter Silas Grieve. A group of men at a table take interest in this and offer to buy Silas a drink. He then sits down with the group and is convinced into telling the tales of his life.
Bet you got some great stories.
A couple. Any of them true?
Jack, be nice.
A few.
The tales he tells require a lot of faith on behalf of the listener, and thus some of the men grow increasingly agitated by him and begin to doubt whether or not he is actually Silas Greaves,
Like how those dime novels make you out to be something you're not?
or just a crazy old man searching for some free booze with a tale to tell. As Silas recounts his life, he claims to have met some of the most well-known outlaws that have ever lived, for example Billy the Kid and Butch Cassidy, and thus the facts he states are countered by stories in books, the official word from the government, or by what the men have heard from other people. Regardless, Silas continues with his stories throughout the game, and it's up to the men to decide whether or not he is who he says he is. Eventually, the true reason for Silas participating in all these killings comes to light, as we and the men learn that Silas is actually really only out for revenge on 3 men who killed his 2 brothers.
It was Johnny Ringo, Roscoe Bob Bryant, and another asshole named Jim. They wanted their money back and everything else we had, including our lives, as those boys didn't want us coming for them later. Bob put that old Spanish coin in my mouth and said, "I won't have it said that I left you with nothing, boy."
Graphically, the game is very impressive. During gameplay, we are given a slightly cel-shaded look similar to that seen in the Borderlands games. The environments are very populated with fauna and props, which helps create a believable feel. On the downside, the areas are relatively small, and so although the levels do look great, they are also quite linear, with one path being your only option most of the time. The between episode cutscenes are seemingly hand-drawn in a graphic novel way and are extremely impressive and really bring the atmosphere in the bar to life. The introduction to some of the characters in the game is also presented in a graphic novel style and is a real treat to watch as it really brings out their personalities. On the audio side of things, we are treated to some really top-notch voice talent. As the game plays out, you can hear the story being told to the men by Silas, and thus every level in the game has a narration from both Silas and the men. I found this to be a really nice touch, as it really helps bring the story to life, as rather than being a silent gun-wielding maniac like in other first-person shooters, you're actually told by Silas how he was feeling at the time. It is also a nice little trick to avoid players getting lost, as Silas will unwittingly drop hints to the player regarding what he did next, and thus the player can follow in his footsteps. The music side of it is also pretty great, with every bit of music fitting really well into the moments of the game. For example, the distant bell sound during duels, and more so one moment in particular towards the end of the game when Silas begins to admit the reason for his actions and thus question them. A really touching song is sung by Silas, and I was really drawn into the game at this point and found myself wanting more than ever to reach its conclusion. Call of Juarez Gunslinger is divided up into 3 areas. First, you have the story mode, which I'll get to in a moment. Secondly, you have an arcade mode, And lastly, you have the duel challenge. I'll talk about each mode individually, but let's start with the story mode first. In story mode, you take control of the main character Silas Greaves. As he tells his story to the men in the bar, you take control of Silas within said story and play each episode out to its conclusion. The story is split into 7 episodes in total, which can be played on 2 different difficulty settings, with a third unlockable after completion. Each episode asks you to complete quite linear objectives within them, like taking out a certain person and getting to a certain point in the level. Standing between Silas and his objective is a horde of outlaws and Native Americans, which you will need to take down if you are going to progress. At the end of each episode is a duel, which can be seen as the boss of the level. I'll talk about the mechanics of this when I cover the duel challenge mode. There isn't a huge amount of weaponry on show here, but for what it's worth, the weaponry that you are able to find and use do the job just fine. An example of some of the weapons include the cowboy's weapon of choice, the 6-shooter, a shotgun, a rifle, and even the classic dynamite. You are also able to melee enemies if they come close enough. While playing through the game, you are rewarded with experience points, which go towards giving Silas some upgrades to his weapons and abilities. There are 3 types of skills to upgrade. These are Gunslinger, which focus on handgun abilities, Ranger, which covers long range weaponry, and finally Trapper, which covers close quarter abilities. You gain these points by taking out enemies and parts of the environment which can be destroyed, like explosive barrels and even cactuses. The number of points you get from taking down enemies depends on where in the body you shoot. It is also possible to chain kill enemies and thus leading to a lot higher experience points. Through killing enemies, you're also filling up your concentration meter, which will allow you to not only slow down time to make it for a lot better aiming, but it also highlights enemies in red, making them a lot easier to see in some of the more clustered locations. Another feature that you have is a sense of death maneuver, which allows Silas to try and dodge the fatal shot from an enemy, and in doing so allows him to take his revenge. After using the sense of death move, you'll have to wait for it to refill before you can use it again. During each level, there is also the opportunity to find secret items, which unlock so-called nuggets of truth. These can be viewed via the main menu. What these basically are little cards with real life facts on them about the characters and locations you encounter during the game. I've never really been a fan of these optional collection parts of video games ever since myself and Raiko totally busted our balls trying to collect the ability orbs in Crackdown 2. However, recently there has been a spate of games which really take this task and make it a little more fun. This includes the recent Tomb Raider, which included notes which filled in some of the narrative gaps about the characters, and now this game, which provides a really interesting history lesson if nothing else. At the end of each level, you are shown some stats for that mission, including amount of enemies killed, weapon of choice, and the duel statistics if a duel took place. I personally enjoyed the story mode a lot. I found myself going back through the game 2 more times after completing it just to experience it all over again. It's quite short, being that it's a downloadable game, but it still managed to pack in a lot of atmosphere and great gameplay. If I had to pick any niggles at all, it would be that sometimes the hit detection on the enemies is a tad off when shooting at them behind cover, and the levels do feel a little too linear at times. These 2 complaints, however, didn't take away the fact that the story does not outstay its welcome and leaves you asking for more rather than having you hoping the end is coming soon as you're becoming bored, which I found Red Dead Redemption did for me. Let's move on to the arcade mode. In this mode, you basically play through all the levels from the story mode, but instead of completing objectives, you are killing for points, which goes towards earning you 3 stars per level. You have 3 different characters to choose from here, with each differing in terms of weaponry and abilities. This is where tactics come into play, as chain kills and proper use of the concentration meter is imperative if you're going to claim those 3 stars. Abilities for the characters are also unlocked as you earn points, making it easier to rack up that score. This mode was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed the idea of just going mental with your guns and learning tactics to make the chain kill number rise and rise. It's a nice alternative to the story if you feel the story is a little too objective centric.
You won't get away with this!
Finally, we have the duel challenge, which consists of you trying to win 15 duels in a row to earn points with only 5 lives. Now let me explain how the duel works. During the standoff section of the duel, you will use your right analog stick to increase the focus percentage. Now you do this by keeping the focus sphere on the enemy and thus decreasing its size. The smaller the size, the more accurate you will be when taking the shot. The enemy will move around, making it hard for you to keep your focus on him and thus slowing down the increase of the focus percentage. The left analog stick is used to increase the speed percentage. Now you do this by guiding your character's hand towards his gun. This in turn will allow you to take your shot a lot quicker when the percentage is high enough. enough. Another thing to consider here is when to take your shot, as this will decide whether or not you have killed your enemy honourably. So if you reach for your gun before he does and manage to take him out, your kill will be unhonourable and thus you will be rewarded no points, but you will still be able to move on to the next enemy. So to break it down in simpler terms, high focus, high speed and reach for your gun after your enemy is the key to success. I should point out this is also how the duels work in the story mode. In conclusion, I had very low hopes for this game due to the Call of Juarez series being very low on my games radar, yet I had an amazing time playing through this game and thought it was well worth every penny that I paid for it. Its story pulled me in, it plays very smoothly, the characters were likeable, and I even found myself reading through the nuggets of truth and they were really fascinating. Charm is the word for this game, and that's because it is covered in it. It's full of little moments which really make you connect with the game and moments that make you laugh. An example of the latter is the constant knowledge that you are playing this game with the narrative of Silas in the bar, and thus we are experiencing this world at the same pace as he is telling the story, which creates some quite funny moments, like for instance there is a scene where one of the men Silas is telling the story to falls asleep, and so to add a little bit of excitement to the story he randomly adds in Native Americans. He then takes them away when the guy wakes up, questioning the plausibility of there being any Native Americans in this area.
Indians? There were Indians?
No. I just wanted to make sure Steve was paying attention. Now, where was I?
You were following the Daltons through a swamp?
That's right. See, Steve? Dwight's paying attention.
No, I'm listening. I was just resting my eyes.
Another scene includes Silas needing to go to the bathroom, and thus we are left waiting for him to return, while the men at the table talk about Silas behind his back. During this moment you're also waiting, and thus the game literally has you going into the same room over and over again until Silas returns to continue his story.
Well, I've had more than a few drinks, and I've been sitting here for quite a spell.
Right through there. Let me show you.
This game is full of moments like this and I wish I could share more, but I really don't want to ruin the game for you, so I'll finish by saying this. Call of Juarez Gunslinger deserves your attention, and you're missing out on something special if you pass it up.
It's been so long hard days. They don't say God's changed my ways, changed my ways. There's evil ways. So I set out, cross that way, strike them down.